All set, Gene?
One moment.
Okay.
Yes, we are good to go. Thank you.
All set, Gene? Okay, so good morning.
One moment.
Oh. Streaming.
We have all the participants here. Join the meeting, and we are recording and streaming to YouTube.
Thank you, Gene. Good morning. Welcome to the 583rd board meeting of the California Regional Water Quality Control Board, Central Valley Region. I'm Mark Bradford, the chair of the Central Valley Board, and I will introduce the other board members in just a minute. For people who want to watch or listen to the meeting online, the board's customary webcast is available. We are receiving presentations and public comments here at the meeting and online through a Zoom meeting platform. If you're here at the meeting and intend to present or comment, or think you might be interested in commenting, you should have filled out the speaker comment card, blue card. And if you're online and planning to comment, you should already be in the Zoom meeting room using the meeting ID and password provided by board staff. If you have not already received this information, you can email us now at agenda5@waterboards.ca.gov. That's agenda followed by the number 5 with no space at waterboards.ca.gov. Include speaker comment in the subject line so we can follow up with you. For those in the Zoom meeting, you will be on mute and your camera turned off until it is your turn to speak. Our meeting host will then unmute you and ask you to turn on your camera if you have one. When you are done speaking and the board members have completed asking questions, you will be placed on mute and your camera turned off. I will now introduce other board members as follows. On my left here, we have Denise Cadera from Allensworth. Next to her, we have Elena Lee Reeder from Sacramento. And next to her is Sean Yang, also of Sacramento. And I think that's all today, huh? We don't have, we have a couple of other board members that are not present today, but may be participating on Zoom. State board member Nicole Morgan will also be participating in the meeting and will give an update to the board a little later. I want to now introduce Executive Officer Patrick Palupa, who will introduce his staff.
Good morning, and thanks to all the board members here who have made the trip up to Reading. It's been a little while since we've been in these council chambers, but we always are very grateful for our hosts here in Reading and the tour that we were able to take yesterday of a different part of the region than we're usually in. To introduce the staff we have here today, to my immediate left is Jessica Yar, Senior Staff Counsel. To her left is Clint Snyder, Assistant Executive Officer here in the Reading office. And to his left is Adam Lapitz, Assistant Executive Officer in the Rancho Cordova office. In the audience, we have Clay Rogers, Assistant Executive Officer in the Fresno office. And to my immediate right, JJ Baum, Assistant Executive Officer in the Rancho Cordova office. And to my very, very, very far right, we have Mindy Maxwell, the Executive Assistant that has been helping make all of the arrangements here, along with the administrative staff of the Reading office, who I want to extend my gratitude to for all the work that they've done to make this meeting possible, and to Bob Chow and AGP, who are doing the broadcast work here today. And with that, I will turn it back to you, Chair Bradford.
Thanks, Patrick. Yeah, and I'd like to thank the Reading staff as well, especially for the tour yesterday. It was kind of a warm day, but we saw some very interesting stuff, especially I thought getting down into Shasta Dam was a historical tour that was really hard to replicate, I think. And some of the restoration activities that are going on up here. So yeah, and also thanks for this great venue that we're in. And with that, we're going to do the Pledge of Allegiance. And since I didn't tap anybody on the shoulder, I guess I'll lead this time. pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America. And to the republic which stands one nation. under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. So we start out with agenda item 2. Are there any board member communications? Start with you, Sean. Want to start that?
Sorry, completely forgot I need to turn it on. Just want to speak on to what Mark started mentioning about the historical tour yesterday at Chester Dam. It was my first time, and it was very special, knowing the fact that it is the biggest dam in California, and it is part of water resources for our region that feeds millions of people. And in addition to that, and it was really neat and special to see the team that works in the hatchery, how they produce fishes for our community. That was really, very nice. And I love the fact that we went to some of the habitat restoration sites, Credit Creek and other places, to really learn about some of the great work that our teams are doing to restore and sustain fish that is much needed for the community. So those sort of work for me is very critical for myself, and I believe my board member and other agency to really have a present look, so that we have a better understanding of what goes on out there, so that when we make decision that is relevant to those sort of arena, we can make better decision for it. So I want to also extend my thank you to the folks that organized that, and thank you to Clay and Clint, I should say, and Patrick and the whole team. So appreciate it.
Thanks, Sean. Alana?
Hi, on September 13th, I attended the Dennis O'Connor California Water Seminar. If you don't know him, he was the Senate Chief Consultant on Natural Resources and Water Committee. And it was such a wonderful treat because he was retiring 2 days later. And, I'm a big believer in checking in with institutional knowledge. And the topics he covered included basic water development history, water rights, climate, hydrology, and other hot topics that are current today. And on September 2nd and on October 13th, I also participated in the Environmental Justice Consortium for EAP implementation. Thanks.
Good morning, everyone. On September 19th, I participated in a regionalization meeting, and this is formally, we will consider calling it a consolidation group. But I've been working with Dr. Carl Longley, Sarge Green, staff from Self-Help Enterprises, Community Water Center, Tri-County Water Authority. And our focus has primarily been on identifying, addressing the needs of disadvantaged communities. And we started off with just consolidation with water. And then we went into sewer, and then we went into stormwater. And so the effort now is regionalization to include all of these efforts in a project that can address all of the issues, including governance. And so we have a draft plan, and I think we're going to be trying to move it forward to have a discussion with State Water Board soon. And there's plenty of funding out there, Justice 40 money out of the federal government. And so we're in a prime position to seek some of those funds to address these issues in South Tulare County. So It's a very important opportunity where funding is now available to begin to address many of the issues that are so prevalent in disadvantaged communities. So I'll continue to keep you updated on that. On September 27th, met with members of the Santa Rosa Rancheria Tachioca tribe. We gave them a tour in Allensworth of the arsenic remediation project. I've mentioned many times, we've been involved with it since 2018. But we just completed the second study. UC Berkeley, Dr. Gadgill's lab have completed the second field testing that was in Allensworth. The first one was also in Allensworth, and they'll be coming back to do a third one. But into doing the presentation to the Tachi tribe, they're very much interested in it because they have arsenic in their water. I think they mentioned that the casino that they have in Lemoore, it's significant, the concentration of arsenic is significantly high. So they are now wanting to meet with Dr. Gadgill and the whole team to see how they can begin to address arsenic. So Allensworth just happened to be in the right position to have working with UC Berkeley and have this program that's underway. And hopefully it will provide many benefits to communities of color and that are suffering or having high arsenic concentration in their water. Also, October 6th, I attended a community water center drinking water tool webinar. Here we were addressing drinking water and the threats to drinking water. October 9th, I attended the Latino Heritage Month celebration at Dos Rios in Modesto. River Partnership has been in that particular area. I always say the name of the lake wrong. No, it's not Tulare. Anyway, it's going to be a state park for the Latino community that has a large population in Modesto. And they gave us a tour of a lot of the restoration activity they have going on out there to restore the wildlife and pulling up some of the seedlings so the bigger trees can continue to grow. And it was just fascinating to see the restoration activity that was going on out there, similar to what we were exposed to yesterday. And I mean, they mentioned that the deer had not been in the area in quite some time, and they are now coming back because the habitat is now conducive for the environment. So that was really a good session to attend. And then finally, on October 7th and 8th, I participated in an NGO webinar on groundwater sustainability and just getting a full understanding. And these programs are put together by Community Water Center, the Leadership Council, many of the organizations, self-help enterprises, to educate disadvantaged community members and leaders in the community about the issues of groundwater sustainability. The GSAs are in a position right now to address many of these issues, but there's still a lot that needs to be done to bring the disadvantaged communities into the discussion and a part of the decision-making process. And then just lastly, I really did enjoy the tour yesterday. I coughed quite a bit throughout, but it was just fascinating. Last time I had a tour like this was Hoover Dam, and I think I was a kid then, but to go through it again and just to see the whole process of how trying to maintain the fish, and just, it was just really fascinating to go and get that whole exercise. And the restoration part was also fascinating. I just commend all of the staff for the work that you guys do and putting these field trips together for the board members. It helps us not only to better understand, but helps us in our decision making. So I commend all of the staff and the work you did in making it a successful field trip for our board yesterday. Thank you so much.
And we had a special treat, and the host of that tour was been there for quite some time and was retiring, and we got in just under the wire to hear her knowledge and and also the knowledge of the new tour guide as well. So, thanks to partners at the Bureau of Reclamation for making that tour possible for us as well. I will note, and my apologies for not mentioning it earlier, also on the Zoom call, I have to bring that up too. We have Lori Oken with the Office of Chief Counsel representing the board, and Kelly Garver, the administrative officer for the board, also participating via Zoom. And I believe I see board member Nick Abdis also participating on the Zoom platform this morning. So we can invite him to share his communications as well.
Yeah, I'm glad you're there, Nick. And I don't know, is Raji on as well?
I don't believe Raji's on this morning. I think she had a
Okay.
conflict that she couldn't get out of.
Okay. Nick, would you like to share any activities you participated in since our last meeting?
Yeah, thanks. And good morning, everybody. I apologize. I was a few minutes late, so I was scrambling to find the link. But I do not have any communications to report since the last meeting. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Well, I have a couple here. I took a short ride on the moving train that is the CV Salts Executive Committee. And obviously there's a lot of momentum and camaraderie in that group. So I observed more than anything else and tried to understand how far along in the process we are. Patrick and the whole team are doing a great job. And I hope to keep tuned in on that subject moving forward. I've been on a couple of chairs calls. The beginning of each month, all the regional board chairs get on a call with Joaquin. And I guess the first call in September on the 12th dealt largely with the recently published California Water Supply Strategy document that Governor Newsom put out in August. And it's a very thorough and kind of complex strategy, I would say. I'd encourage you all to get a copy of it and read through it to understand where the state is planning to implement storage solutions, desalinization, curtailment activities, pipe or treatment to pipe distribution of water. And there's several others, but it's a very thorough and I think ambitious document, and definitely worth a read. And then there was a lot of discussion at all these meetings the last couple of months. There's been discussion about planning for the WQCC meeting that is taking place on October 27th and 28th in Sacramento. And mainly talking about agenda items for that. And it's going to revolve largely around that water supply strategy document. And then they also talked quite a bit about the current budget. I think across the state and regional boards, there's going to be an addition of 120 some odd positions. Patrick, I can't remember how many is going to trickle down to the Central Valley Board. Do you know?
Not as many as we'd like, but I think a lot of it has to do with a lot of the positions do have to do with addressing critical drinking water needs and infrastructure needs that are part of federal and state packages to get the money out the door and make sure that there's appropriate accounting. And certainly for water quality issues and permitting and new legal requirements, we will get a small amount of staff, but a very, very small, unfortunately, amount of that overall package will be coming to us.
Thank you. I guess the only other item I'd mention, and it wasn't anything I participated in, but I reviewed the recently published racial equity resolution that the Central Valley Board has been working on. It follows the state board's resolution that was, I don't know, put out a few months ago. And it's, again, very comprehensive. Every program that the Central Valley Board is working on have established goals for racial equity, and metrics and tools are being developed that will follow those goals. And I think it goes along with a lot of the hard work that Denise has done on behalf of the board in her community and beyond her community. So I think it's an important step forward, and it's going to be a kind of an ongoing foundation of the work that the Central Valley Board is doing. And then finally, I think specifically, I wanted to call out George Lowe, who Patrick mentioned, put together most of the tour that we participated in yesterday. And again, it was amazing to get inside that dam and to have that great tour by an experienced tour guide. She had a lot of anecdotes about being there for a long time. And of course, interacting with the Fish and Wildlife Service and the Bureau. I know there's a lot of preparation and planning that goes into a tour like that, and we appreciate it. And we had a great lunch too. Thank you. So I think that's it for the board. Is Nicole Morgan available to give us an update from the state board?
Good morning, Chair Bradford and members of the board. I'm happy to join you virtually this morning and to provide a liaison report. Just to add a little regarding this year's Water Quality Coordinating Committee meeting, the meeting will be held, as Chair Bradford stated, on October 27th and 28th. And this year's meeting will be a hybrid meeting. So there will be the opportunity to meet both in person and virtually. At our October 3rd board meeting, the state board celebrated the 10th anniversary of the first human right to water policy in the nation, alongside Cal EPA Secretary Yana Garcia and community representatives. So also at our October 3rd board meeting, the state board adopted the Clean Water State Revolving Fund Intended Use Plan and Drinking Water State Revolving Fund Intended Use Plan. Anticipated grants awarded through California's Clean Water SRF program may be $468 million over 5 years and $355 million over 5 years for California's Drinking Water SRF program. Also, in addition, at our October 3rd board meeting, we adopted this year's fund expenditure plan for the Safe and Affordable Drinking Water Fund. Staff will hold the third Safer Affordability Workshop on November 1st. On September 16th, staff released a water quality control policy for siting, design, operation, and maintenance of on-site wastewater treatment systems, also known as the OTS policy, for public comment. The deadline for written comments will be November 1st. We will hold a hearing on October 18th to receive oral public comments. The statewide, so changing subjects to hydrology and urban conservation, the statewide water use dropped in August by 10.5% relative to August 2020, with 4% cumulative savings from July 2020 to August 2020, from July 2021 to August 2022 relative to 2020. Sorry, that's a lot of years in there. So the cumulative savings for the Sacramento River region was 12.4%, and for the San Joaquin River was 7.1%. Our next update will be next week at our October 18th board meeting. Additionally, next week on October 19th, we will consider adoption of a proposed resolution to establish water loss performance standards for urban retail water suppliers. And also on the 19th, next Wednesday, we will hold a public workshop in order to receive public comments on the draft racial equity action plan. That's the state board's racial equity plan. It's a compilation of actions intended to advance the state board's racial equity efforts to create a future where we equitably preserve, enhance, and restore California's water resources and drinking water for all Californians, regardless of race, and where race is not a predictor of professional outcomes for water board employees. So the deadline for submitting comments is 5 p.m. on October 24th. So that concludes my liaison report for this board meeting. If there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you, Nicole.
No questions, but we missed you out on the tour yesterday.
I'm so sad I couldn't join you guys. It sounds just absolutely amazing.
They made us exercise and all of that. I mean, they're going to have to work on planning things there for the people that are over 50. But it was a great tour, and glad to see you today. Thank you.
Yeah, we missed you at the dinner, Denise. We were just sitting there. It would have been fine. Okay, moving on to agenda item 4, the public forum. Mindy, has anyone submitted a request to speak?
Yes, Chair Bradford, we have Cedric Twite representing the Sierra Pacific Industries who wishes to comment.
Welcome.
Thank you. Good morning, board members. Cedric Twite. My name is Cedric Twite. I work for Sierra Pacific Industries as their regulatory affairs manager. I didn't want to miss this opportunity to welcome you all to Reading. And if you're not aware of Sierra, because Reading is the home of Sierra Pacific Industries. Sierra Pacific Industries is a family-owned, vertically integrated wood products company that owns 2.4 million acres in the western states, 1.9 million acres in California, with about 1.7 million acres under the jurisdiction of the Central Valley Water Quality Control Board. So I wanted to have an opportunity to say hello. We interact quite extensively. We also operate 10 sawmill facilities in the Central Valley, 5 wood burn and cogeneration plants, 2 millwork plants, 1 remanufacturing facility, and 1 very nice custom wood windows facility down in Red Bluff. So what we've been up to recently on the forestry side has been very little green tree salvaging and just extensive fire restoration work. We've been operating under the new WDR since 2018. When that came into play, we weren't sure how it was going to perform. There were some extra requirements that were things that we would have to implement, different reporting periods and things like that. But that went into effect about halfway through the Bagley fire, which we're operating on. And this year, we completed our last notice of termination on the Bagley fire. So lots of interaction with the board staff over a long period of time on that. And of course, we'll be continuing to monitor that as we move away from those active operations as part of our Sustainable Forestry Initiative Force Certification Program. After the Bagley, of course, we had the Carr Delta HERS, and that was a big effort. Again, the WDR performed pretty well there, different kind of mix of issues. Then we had the Hog Fire, the Claremont Fire, the Bear Fire, Caldor Fire, and then the Dixie Fire. And now this year we have the Mosquito Fire to deal with. So really we've had a really full plate on trying to restore thousands and thousands of acres of burned forest land, but we're getting after it. We've gotten really good at it, sadly enough, but really trying to keep those watersheds forested and producing some of the very important timber and non-timber resources that we depend on. So in summary, I'd just like to say that the WDR permit process and our interaction with your staff has been going well, and appreciate the hard work of the Central Valley staff. And I think that the waste discharge requirements permit process is working well. And quite frankly, I think I'm going to point to it when the North Coast Regional Board moves from their waiver to a WDR, because I think it's a good model that gets good results and is also very practical. So thank you very much, and thanks for continuing to come to Reading.
Thank you. I know Sierra Pacific's a big part of this community, and appreciate your efforts on restoring all those burnt lands. Important habitat, obviously, as well as a resource for you guys. So thank you for that. Are there any other speakers? Anybody in the room? Nope. Okay, thanks. Moving on to agenda item 5 is the executive officer's report. Prior to each meeting, the executive officer works with the executive assistant and the board's program managers to compile a report on the status of the board's programs, its staffing, and many different initiatives the board is working on. At this time, the executive officer is available to take questions on this report if there are any.
No, thanks so much, Chair Bradford. I do have one Superior Accomplishment Award to talk about today, but certainly any questions on the executive officer's report, be happy to answer with them. And I'll also add that, Chair Bradford and Vice Chair Kadara will be meeting after this board meeting to, periodically check in on the contents of the executive officer report, just to make sure that it's meeting the needs of the board and telling you all the relevant information. If you'd like to see something else, we'll put it in there and make sure that we're kind of relaying everything meaningful to you. But without further ado, I do want to present and I think I see him on the Zoom, a Superior Accomplishment Award to Chad Neptune. Can you verify, Mindy, that he's on the Zoom? Or somebody?
I don't have access to the attendees.
gotcha.
Jean,
I am here, Patrick.
okay.
All right, fantastic. All right, well, Chad, congratulations on the Superior Accomplishment Award. Chad is an engineering geologist in the Central Valley Water Board's Fresno office, and as part of the site is part of the site cleanup unit. Chad is being recognized for his outstanding work performance on facility inspections and facility document reviews and responses. Chad joined the Central Valley Water Board Site Cleanup Unit in 2019 and has applied his past consulting experience and technical skills to effectively regulate and bring into compliance the facilities he oversees. Chad has been a consistent performer in the Site Cleanup Unit, providing insightful data interpretations from complex data sets while providing outstanding responsiveness by responding in a timely manner. During this quarter, Chad produced 21 deliverables, including 2 responses to requests for exemptions from PFAS work plans, explaining why the standard for exemption had not been met, 2 groundwater reviews for data-rich cases, comments on 2 groundwater assessment work plans, a no further action consideration letter, including outside agency consultation for a case with atypical constituents of concern, and 2 responses for contentious issues at our old Hammer Field groundwater cleanup site. Chad also serves on the Water Board's Disability Advisory Committee and has recently assumed additional responsibility for oversight of the on-site wastewater treatment system program for Region 5. Chad is a valuable asset of the Site Cleanup Unit. In addition to his excellent attitude and professional demeanor, Chad willingly and enthusiastically works on any project he's given. He has the ability to quickly complete investigations, reviews, and write-ups, and as a result, completes a large volume of work. Chad carries with him a level of professionalism and dedication that well represents the Central Valley Water Board. I am recommending that Chad receive this award. And I will say, just as a comment, knowing Chad from coming down to the Fresno office, we often get from senior managers, from board members, wow, you've got a lot of people retiring, over the last few years. Well, how's it going? How are the programs dealing with those types of retirements? And knowing Chad and the level of enthusiasm that he brings and the level of expertise that he brings, I think the board's in really, really good hands. Chad's kind of representative of a group of staff that have been hired on the past, 3, 4, 5 years, that are truly doing exceptional work, that are bringing with them, like I said, enthusiasm, but also a very, very high level of professionalism. And that while they may not have the institutional knowledge of folks who have been with the board for 20, 25 years, Chad's an example of somebody who, is working with Eric Rapport right now to kind of understand the on-site wastewater treatment program and to get a download of as much of that 25 plus years of experience that he possibly can, so that our programs will be in good hands as we move forward. So Chad, just congratulations for this award, and hope to see you down in Fresno soon.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, congratulations, Chad. It's kind of brings back some memories. The company I used to work for did a lot of work on Old Hammer Field on behalf of the National Guard Bureau. So next time I'm in Fresno, I'll have to catch up on that one. So congratulations and thanks.
Thanks.
Okay, is there any discussion on this item by the board members or anybody else in the room?
Regarding the executive officer's report?
Yeah.
Yes. My only comment is that, the information is there to provide to the board of activities that have happened since our previous meeting. And I think the information is very informative. It lets us know everything that the board has been doing, you know, all of the projects that you're working on, enforcement and you know, CV salts, all of the issues, they're there in the report. So we're getting the information, and I certainly appreciate not just the work that all of you do, but the reporting of the information to us so we have a better understanding of what's happening within the meetings, and that you guys keep us informed. You know, we're going to talk about it later, but we'll see what recommendations we come up with. But I think what's put together is very succinct and providing information to the board that we need to know of the operations that's happening.
Absolutely. Well, I appreciate that feedback. And I think we're just, you know, in the spirit of continual improvement, always trying to check in, make sure that it's being relayed in a format that's accessible to the board members, sure, but also to the public, you know, to understand what we have going on. And before we close out this item, I would like to note, you know, what Chair Bradford mentioned is the Regional Racial Equity Resolution is out for public comment. It represents a huge amount of work from all the program managers, plus a racial equity team that we assembled at the regional board. Staff drawn from throughout the organization, all three offices, from relatively new staff to staff that have been around quite a while, talking with each and every one of the program managers, getting their feedback about measurable, attainable goals that we can lay out and hold ourselves accountable for, I think most importantly, for advancing racial equity in each of the water board's 19 water quality programs. And we actually got a little enthusiastic, and some of the programs have more than one goal, if you'll notice, but all of them are fairly ambitious. They're kind of in line with where we've been going for quite some time, but I think they increase the level of accountability, to be sure, and increase the level of outreach that we're going to be holding ourselves to as we work forward with new programs and new priorities. So I did want to note that we will be accepting any and all public comments through November 7th. And then the idea is that we'd be convening in December to consider the resolution for this board, and also alongside the water quality program priorities for the upcoming year, so that the two of those can be dealt with hand in hand as the program managers work on their annual work plans for the next year. So just want to relay that. And with that, any more questions?
I'd just like to comment that the fact that the state passed a resolution, I think it was November 21.
That's correct.
And that our regional board has done a draft of a resolution. I like the fact that within each one of the programs, we're addressing racial equity. And, you know, my mindset is that we should have been doing that all the time, but that this is where we are. And I think our regional board has never shied away from dealing with issues, controversial issues, and trying to make things better. So I think we're on the right path. And I commend the work that's been done in this, and let's move it forward and see if we can have the positive results that we've laid out in the resolution. Thank you so much for the work.
I would like to chime in, if that's okay. I also like to add on to some of the stuff that you guys already alluded to. Racial equity, it's definitely hitting home for me as well. As Patrick know, I have communicated with him extensively, and we have done some work that covered that area. You know, we all know this country is lived by all sorts of diversity and all sorts of ethnicities, and that's why it makes it special. I love this resolution because the fact that we stated some of the programs and identified the goals in there. And I think that's very transparent and very intentional. And that's what we need for the public to see as well. And to me, it's very clear where we're going, what we want to do, to cover this racial equity. So this racial equity resolution is excellent. Thank you so much for everyone that have put effort into making this possible. Thank you so much.
I'd like to say a few remarks. I really do look forward to seeing the full package in December, but with racial equity, I like that we're beginning by looking at ourselves first. I really do believe that it begins with us individually first, and I love that we're not afraid to open it, dissect it, look at it internally, and actually count and be transparent about our approach. And so I really do look forward to seeing this in December, actually.
Thank you, everybody. I guess when I read through that racial equity resolution, and simultaneously I was looking at a report on Allensworth that PBS published, and it really kind of brought to light the historical inequities that have taken place probably throughout California. And it's good to see it written down on paper that you established some goals that are, as Patrick noted, are measurable moving forward, and that it follows the same format, the same goals that the state put together, but they'll be, of course, fine-tuned for the Central Valley. So I thought it was a really strong effort, and I appreciate the work that went into it. It looked like a lot of work went into it, and look forward to approving that resolution when it comes before the board in December. Oh, yeah. Nick, do you have any comments on that subject?
I do not. I'll look forward to the resolution in our December meeting.
Okay, thank you. So if there's no further discussion on the executive officer report, we can move forward to agenda item 6, which is consideration of the minutes from the previous board meeting on August 11th. Are there any edits or corrections to the August meeting minutes? And if not, I ask for a motion and a second to approve.
I'll move to approve the minutes from August 2022.
Okay, Elena motioned and Denise seconded. So we do a roll call vote. Mindy?
Board Member Yang,
Aye.
Board Member Aptis,
Aye.
Board Member Lee Reader,
Aye.
Vice Chair Kadara.
Yes.
And Chair Bradford.
Yes. The minutes are approved. So agenda item 7 is our uncontested calendar. This is the time and place for a public hearing to consider uncontested items 11 through 14 on our agenda. We will also be considering item 10 under its own separate vote. Mindy, has anyone submitted a request to comment on item 10 or any of the uncontested items?
I do have a number of requests, but they do not wish to speak. They said they will raise their hand. So if there's anybody out there that wishes to speak.
And just to note, raise and lower hand if you're participating via cell phone. I think there might be 1 or 2 people. Is *9. So we'll give it just a couple of seconds to see if anybody raises their hand. If not, we'll proceed with the vote or the motion on the uncontested calendar.
Apparently, there's no comments. If not, we will do a roll call for item 10. Item 10 is the Lamont Public Utility District and Recology Blossom Valley Organic South and Lamont Wastewater Treatment Facility in Kern County. It's consideration of a rescission of the cease and desist order. So if I could have a motion.
So moved.
I second.
Thank you, Nick and Elena seconded. We do a roll call, Mindy.
Board Member Yang,
Aye.
Board Member Aptis,
Aye.
Board Member Lee Reader,
Aye.
Vice Chair Kadara, and Chair Bradford.
Yes. And we also need a motion and a second for uncontested calendars, items 11 through 14. I won't read through all those, but they're uncontested.
Okay, I'll make a motion to approve of the uncontested calendar items 11 through 14.
Second.
Thank you. Denise motioned and Nick seconded. If we could do a roll call, Mindy.
Board Member Yang,
Aye.
Board Member Abdus,
Aye.
Board Member Lee Reader,
Aye.
Vice Chair Kadara,
Yes.
and Chair Bradford.
Yes. Thank you. We're zipping right through this. Agenda item 8, I believe all the board members have interacted with Mindy to approve these dates, but just to double check, the proposed board meeting dates for 2023 are the 23rd and 24th of February, April 27th and 28th in Bakersfield, where I think we're going to get a field tour of some oil fields down there, a site tour. 22nd and 23rd of June, the 10th and 11th of August, the 12th and 13th of October back here in Reading, and the 14th and 15th of December. Do any board members have any conflicts with these proposed dates? I think we've gone around the circle a few times, so we'll accept those and move on to agenda item 9. So this item's an informational item only on our enforcement program. We'll hear a status report from the regional board's program, enforcement program manager. This is an information item only and no action will be taken, although the board may ask questions and provide direction to staff. Following the staff presentation, interested persons will be allowed 3 minutes each to address the board. Following the staff presentation, oh, never mind. So we'll move forward with this now. You could introduce yourself to the board.
Good morning, Chair Bradford and members of the board. My name is Carrie Holmes, and I'm here to provide you with an annual update on the Central Valley Water Board Compliance and Enforcement Program. Prior to my update, the Director of State Board's Office of Enforcement, Yvonne West, has agreed to provide an annual update for the Office of Enforcement. So I'm going to let her start. We haven't actually practiced in this forum, and I don't see a presentation up on my monitor. Looks like Gene is navigating his way to Yvonne's. Great, thank you. So here's Yvonne.
Good morning, Chair Bradford, members of the board. Yvonne West, Director of the Office of Enforcement from the State Water Board. Thank you for having me here today. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you, as well as a special thanks to all of Region 5 staff who helped to make the field tour happen yesterday. It was a pleasure to be included in that. I really enjoyed seeing some more Region 5 and the restoration projects in particular were very interesting. So again, thanks for allowing me to join you in that. I really appreciated it. So I'm going to just jump in here with an overview of the Office of Enforcement and our water quality enforcement policy, which applies to all of the actions that the regional boards bring before you, regional board enforcement staff bring before you, as well as a quick overview of statewide enforcement goals. And of course, please feel free to jump in with any questions that you have along the way or at the end of the presentation. Just here to answer questions that you may have. Can I move the slides forward from here, or do you guys have to do that? Okay. All right, next slide, please. So this is actually a picture of our building. The Office of Enforcement is located at 801 K Street. So we're kind of in the same vicinity as the Cal EPA building, but kind of across Cesar Chavez Park. This nice, dark, intimidating looking building that we lovingly refer to as the Darth Vader building. But the Office of Enforcement was formed as its own office in 2006 in the State Water Board. It was started out as a fairly small office. It's multidisciplinary, meaning we include both attorneys, staff, and technical staff in our office. And we're set up with the goal of professionalizing enforcement and providing a separation of functions between enforcement counsel and staff and the Office of Chief Counsel and other enforcement staff. We have since 2006 been working very closely with the regions and the state board programs to establish strong enforcement programs. There's just been the forming of our office was an open recognition of the importance that enforcement plays in all of our regulatory programs. We've acknowledged that we ask our regulated community to do a lot. Sometimes it's time consuming and expensive to comply and ensure that we protect our water quality and our water supply. And if there are no consequences for those who choose not to comply, then it's really not fair for that regulated community. Provides an economic benefit and it provides an advantage. And we really want to make sure that that's not the case and that there's incentive to comply. Most of our regulatory programs really rely on voluntary compliance and reporting. And it's important that there's consequences when those actions aren't taken. Our office mission statement, we're actually going to embark on reviewing and looking at this mission statement as an office, just because it's time to do that again. But generally speaking, we're there to help promote enforcement of the water rights and water quality laws, ensure that violations are properly investigated, documented, and enforced against in accordance with the Water Board's policies, to promote compliance, deter future violations, and protect water quality and water supply and availability for the benefit of present and future generations. Next slide, please. So, the regional boards are probably most familiar with our legal offices because our counsel appear before you when we bring formal enforcement actions before the regional boards. At the Office of Enforcement, we have two chief counsels, David Boyers and Mayumi Okamoto. These assistant chief counsels have two separate units that provide assistance for the Water Board's enforcement programs. If you can go to the next slide. Our state board legal unit, which again is headed up by Mayumi Okamoto, handles legal support for a number of programs, including water rights, cannabis, which is interesting. It started as a state board program. We keep it within our state board unit program because there is such a strong coordination role that the Office of Enforcement plays in that program, and we'll talk about that a little later. But ultimately, as you know, that is a regional board program as well. And the regional board here at Region 5 has always played an important role in that program. Drinking water and fraud, waste, and then two units within our office that I'll talk about briefly are fraud, waste, and abuse prevention unit and our UST underground storage tank unit. Again, I'll address those under our technical units in a bit. The attorneys in the state board legal unit provide enforcement support for these programs. It's approximately 8 staff counsels in our office now for that program. Turning to the next slide, we have the regional board legal unit, and this is the unit that your enforcement staff interface with more frequently. It's headed up by David Boyers as our assistant chief counsel, and they provide legal support for the regional board's water quality programs. Next slide, please. Oh, wait, I'll stick on this slide for a second. Something about the legal units that you should know is that we have dedicated attorney liaisons that are assigned to each regional board. For Region 5, we have Julie Macedo and Naomi Rubin, which I believe are actually watching the feed here today. And we also have Heather Jidkoff, who is in the state board unit, but she's your cannabis program liaison. So these 3 liaison attorneys are available for general support, things like enforcement case prioritization discussions with your staff, enforcement trainings for your staff, and they can also advise on investigations when they're very initial stages before a case actually gets referred to our office. They're a resource for legal questions and planning and strategizing. They meet with the water quality liaisons, Julie and Naomi, meet with your enforcement staff and with Carrie on a periodic basis to triage cases and to discuss what your regional board priorities are when it comes to enforcement. Legal staff also provide, as you know, support for prosecutions, formal enforcement prosecutions in the form of ACLs, cleanup and abatement orders, cease and desist orders, time schedule orders, or investigative orders like 13267 requests for information, or even subpoenas when appropriate. So those are just some of the services that the Office of Enforcement legal staff can provide to your region and do provide to your region. Moving on to the next slide. I want to talk just briefly about the other resources we have in the Office of Enforcement. We also have investigative and technical staff that are available to assist regional board in developing cases. Under our new section manager, Brian Elder, we have the Special Investigations Unit, the Fraud, Waste, and Abuse Prevention Unit, and the Underground Storage Tank Unit. Our Special Investigation Unit has a number of technical staff, environmental scientists, engineering geologists, WRCs, and they're available to help with investigations. They do a lot of work with the EJ Task Force, interfacing with both Cal EPA and US EPA on EJ initiatives, and then working with your staff as well on those initiatives when there are regional components to those initiatives. And they also currently are focused a lot on collection system inspections. We have a small group there who work and have developed expertise in collection system inspections, and they're available and they come out to the regions and assist the regions with those inspections. They can work in a number of ways. And I'll talk about some of that a little bit later. Let me real quick just go over our Fraud, Waste, and Abuse Prevention Unit, which you might not know that much about. It's a unit within our office that audits and investigates the spending of state monies, particularly focused on the Underground Storage Tank Cleanup Fund. But as an agency, the state board does have authority for other grants and loans programs to require reimbursement of inappropriately reimbursed costs, or they can even disbar contractors who are found to partake in fraudulent activities or inflated billing practices against our state funds. Our Underground Storage Unit Enforcement Unit also does work sometimes with the regional board UST staff and sometimes with the local CUPAs. We have a number of initiatives running currently through our underground storage tank focused on significant recalcitrant violators in EJ communities, as well as looking at the removal of improperly abandoned tanks across the state. Moving on to the next slide, our cannabis enforcement section. We have in our office Michael Buckman, who is cannabis enforcement coordinator, who has program-wide obligations to help keep cannabis enforcement.
You need to change the slide for people.
Oh, thank you. Sorry, I didn't notice that. It keeps the cannabis enforcement efforts across the state coordinated, as not only internally between the various offices, regions, and divisions involved in the cannabis enforcement program, but also with our outside partners, California Department of Fish and Wildlife and Department of Cannabis Control. As I mentioned earlier, the cannabis program is unique. Region 5 has always been involved in the cannabis program since it was an initiative with a small staff. Your staff have always been very active in our enforcement efforts in this program. And while it is a relatively small program on the scale of the regional board and the state board, it plays a really important role in addressing the threats to water quality and water supply that we see both from illegal and regulated cannabis industry. Our office has a very small enforcement unit of 3 right now, along with Michael Buckman, who does the coordination, but they are available to assist the region when necessary, and they have been known to come out to help with inspections when additional staff is needed. And we work closely in coordination with your in-house regional cannabis staff as well. Just generally moving on to the next slide, just a general overview of all the technical assistance type work that we provide. Again, we have a variety of disciplines within our office. It's important for us as an office to have that independent technical view from our staff in-house to look at. We can either run independent investigations as an office, which we sometimes do, or we simply come in and support an already started regional board investigation, and we assist in your program staff in bringing enforcement through to a final action in front of this board. Next slide, please. I want to take a minute to just talk about our water quality enforcement policy. It's probably a policy that you've seen and you may be familiar with when formal enforcement comes before you. It is controlling. It is a regulation that identifies how those enforcement cases get prioritized, and it discusses how we implement our discretion to impose penalties and come up with one of the most important things is the penalty methodology, which I'll talk about briefly after this slide. I wanted to let you know that our water quality enforcement policy, which was last adopted in 2017, is coming back up for a 5-year review. This process is going to be starting. We'll be putting out a proposed update for public comment as well as the regional board comments. And then we'll hope to bring it to the state board in August of 2023. One of the things we'll be doing with the updated policy is we'll be adding template hearing procedures for ACL hearings, administrative civil liability hearings. And so going through this process and updating the policy will make those hearing procedures a regulation, and they will be used and implemented throughout all the regions when bringing administrative civil liability. So I just wanted to let you know that there will be lots of dialogue, communication, and workshops, and opportunity to hear if all the regional boards, including yours, have any suggestions for updates to the policy, and an opportunity to comment before any final updates are adopted. Go ahead and move on to the next slide. So something you may be familiar with is within the water quality enforcement policy, there is a detailed penalty methodology. As an agency, both the regional boards all have pretty broad discretion in determining what penalty to impose for a formal administrative civil liability. In exercising that discretion, there are some statutory obligations on what kind of factors to consider. Those statutory obligations are built into this penalty methodology. It is somewhat complex. We do have a complicated Excel spreadsheet that staff can use to plug in numbers and come up with a proposed penalty at the end of the day. It is a 10-step process. This is just the first 3 steps. There's going to be 3 kind of phases I'll talk about. The first one is initial liability. Then there is total base liability, and then an adjusted final liability. And I'm going to talk through those steps on a high level. They are detailed in the enforcement policy. I think they're important to understand as a board for a number of reasons. These steps and these considerations, again, are to make sure that our statutory obligation to consider relative factors are considered before we propose to impose a penalty. But just so you know, your enforcement staff goes through this exercise when they draft up an administrative civil liability complaint. And they usually go through this exercise before they even engage in conversations with the discharger about violations. And it comes into play in our settlement discussions as well, because we will use this methodology to develop a range of proposed penalties. And that's really where a settlement negotiation begins. And if those numbers get adjusted in the settlement discussion, it's for one of 2 reasons. It's because there's new information that's been discovered in the settlement process that merits under the policy an adjustment, or 2, sometimes there are other factors, relevant factors or litigation risks that can be taken into consideration to reach a compromise, to come up with maybe a SEP so that some of the penalty gets separated out and goes towards a specific project. So it's actually really only one reason. It's new information. There's not really a second reason. I mean, staff doesn't just arbitrarily come up with a number, as I guess the point I'm trying to get across to you. And when they do go into a settlement, if they come out with a new number, it needs to be justified through this policy. And it's not, again, it's not an arbitrary exercise. It's based on the facts of the case and the interpretation of those facts by the expertise that we have on staff, our technical expertise. And OE's role in those negotiations is to represent you as a regional board, and our attorneys do just that. They represent your enforcement staff, and they represent your priorities and your missions and your goals for the individual enforcement case. So I'm going to step through these a little bit. When determining initial liability, some of the factors that we look at the harm or the potential harm of that discharge, the toxicity of the material that's being discharged. Then we use the discharge violation matrix to determine a percentage of the max penalty to start off with. And then in step 3, there are some ways we can adjust for non-discharge violations in looking at whether the potential for harm is moderate, minor, or major. And we come up with an initial liability, walking through those steps. Once we have that initial liability, you can go ahead and switch the slide, please. We start to adjust it based on a number of other statutory factors. We look at culpability and conduct of the discharger in step 4 and come up with a multiplier. We also look at history of violation. When we talk about history of violation, we're talking about violations that have been demonstrated and prosecuted, that have been proven. And we look at cleanup and cooperation. And this is an opportunity if you have a discharge violation where you feel that the discharger responded appropriately, took all necessary actions to clean up, you can give them a multiplier that will reduce the potential penalty. Going on to step 5, taking that total base liability amount, and we look at the days of violation or the gallons. And so that liability amount is then evaluated based on days and in gallons of violation, cleanup and cooperation factors. There's a step 5 where we can look at alternative penalty. And that's sometimes appropriate when you have a collapsing of days for a large discharge of certain characteristics. We allow for a collapsing of days from, let's say you have a kind of low, it's mostly used with recycled water or sometimes a discharge of a very, very watered down affluent violation. We can either do some adjustments on the days and gallons in that step. So moving on to the next slide, we take the final liability. Once you have kind of an adjusted liability amount, depending on the types of violations, the culpability of the discharger, the character of the discharge, the potential for harm, we then look at some of the other statutory requirements. So we look at, in step 6, ability to pay and continue in business. This is where the prosecution team, or if it's in a formal proceeding, the regional board, looks at whether or not the penalty being proposed in relation to the ability to pay and the discharger's ability to continue in business is appropriate. It is not a directive that requires an adjustment, but it requires consideration of the ability to pay and to continue into business. I always tell regional boards, they have the discretion to go forward even if they determine it's going to put someone out of business if the violation is egregious enough, but they have to consider it. Often, as in an enforcement posture with a enforcement team, if the discharger raises an inability to pay claim, we ask for additional information. We ask for further backup to justify why they feel they have an inability to pay. And we look to get enough information so we can reach an independent conclusion on that. We have a number of resources in the Office of Enforcement to do this analysis, and we also have outside contracts with experts, economic experts, who can do this analysis. But we need to get sufficient information if a discharger is going to raise that as a viable defense. Sometimes we'll get in a situation where they just want to assert it. It's a general assertion, but they don't want to provide sufficient information or any information. Maybe there's a sensitivity to providing tax returns or other information that would allow us to reach that conclusion independently or to objectively analyze that. If we can't get that information, we as a prosecution team don't feel justified in adjusting a penalty without substantiation. As a prosecution team, when we come before you, we're asked to substantiate and provide evidence to support all of our claims. We feel like it is fair to require a discharger to do the same. So we will look at that information if it's provided, and this is one of those circumstances I mentioned before. If we have information that demonstrates an inability to pay, In a settlement negotiation, 99.8% of the time, your enforcement staff will make an adjustment to adjust for that. If they don't feel comfortable doing that, they'll bring it to you to make that determination. But generally speaking, when we receive sufficient information that adequately demonstrates an inability to pay, we will adjust that proposed liability, taking that factor into consideration. Step 7 is economic benefit. A little bit different analysis, but similar in the sense that we're trying to understand what was the benefit of non-compliance? Was there an economic benefit to this discharger as compared to maybe someone else in the same industry who did do what we expected, who did comply with our requirements? What was that economic benefit? And as a matter of policy under the water quality enforcement policy, we should recapture that benefit and 10% when possible to deter future violators from making that type of decision on a business basis, as a matter of doing business basis. The thinking of the logic behind that policy is simply this: if it's going to cost you the same thing or less if you get caught, then why would you comply in the first place? And that's really where we bring that economic benefit into play. We have, again, resources in our office. We have training we've provided to enforcement staff, and we're available to provide to your enforcement staff going forward on how you determine economic benefit. And it is a little bit of a complex analysis. We do look at like what were the costs, what should have been done to comply. So sometimes we have to define what that is. And then we look at what the cost of that would have been. If it's avoided costs, it's a different analysis than if it's just a delayed cost. Because if they're going to do it anyways, what we do is we basically take into account, well, how much money did they save in the time that they didn't have to do it? And that's like the cost of money almost. It's what it comes down to. But we do it on that level. We look at that level of detail because we really do want to deter future behavior for future violations. And it is a good indicator and a good way to do that. So we'll look at that economic benefit. We'll make sure that the penalty we're proposing captures that economic benefit plus 10%. And again, another place where we would accept evidence or information that, contrary to our analysis, if the discharger came forward in a settlement discussion and wanted to demonstrate that our assumptions were wrong. Other factors as justice may require is a little bit of a catch-all step, and we make adjustments here for other factors as justice may require. When we identify facts that aren't otherwise accounted for, inculpability or other of those factors, then we can make adjustments for it here and articulate why we made those adjustments. That's really a key, is being able to articulate exactly what we adjusted and why we did it. Again, just being transparent about the proposed penalty. We would be transparent with the discharger for why we adjusted it. This is maybe where we could take into account something that the discharger raises that isn't otherwise captured in the policy. Having trouble thinking off the top of my head of a good example right now. Sometimes we use it very rarely if there's a high litigation risk and a high cost to pursue. Maybe in a settlement context, we could adjust here to account for that, to reach a mutually agreeable settlement that we feel is justified under the policy and reflects our goals with the policy and our goals for enforcement generally. Step 8 is we simply look at the minimum and maximum statutory liability amounts and make sure we're in that range. It's just a check to make sure we're within our authorities, basically. If there are any minimums that apply, to make sure we've met them, and then make sure that we're, of course, not proposing something above what we could statutorily otherwise impose. And then that brings you to your final liability amount. And again, this is an exercise we go through as a prosecution team before we start a settlement discussion, so we have a sense of what we'd be willing to take to hearing. And then when we come to hearing, this is what we bring to you in a hearing. We bring you this analysis, we bring you the evidence that supports all these steps and tells you how we reached this conclusion on how we applied these steps to get where we are and why we're proposing the amount that we are proposing. I'm pausing because that was a lot of information.
Yeah, it is a lot of information, and you need a break right about now. But yeah, I would just come in. I mean, we've sat through many of the enforcement, the ACLs before, and following this process, it's what needs to happen to bring discharges into compliance, and as you've said, through this, just to verify all the information that is accurate and correct, and that you do give the discharger the benefit of the doubt to provide their information, rather their ability to pay, the purpose for the violations, if they can justify any of those. But I think the process that's laid out here, the methodology, is where we need to be to make sure that we have discharges in compliance and protecting our water quality. So.
Yeah, and again, there's this nice Excel spreadsheet that your advisory team will have that we have that makes all the math a little easier. That's just my attorney perspective, is I like to have that math taken care of really easily in front of me. All right, if there are any other questions, I'm going to turn back to just some general enforcement goals and some statewide enforcement goals that we have, priorities that we have right now. So if you can go to the next slide. So just generally from a broad basis, anytime we start an enforcement initiative or we assess whether we're going to bring an enforcement case, we do have limited resources, and we all acknowledge that we have those limited resources. So we try to work with the regional boards or program staff, if it's a state board program, to identify the greatest need for enforcement, to focus our efforts on where we feel that greatest need is, where that greatest level of non-compliance is, where we need to see some additional compliance from the program. Then we try to establish an even playing field. And again, I talked about this previously. This is because the intent is to ensure that the folks who are participating actively and diligently in our regulated programs aren't at an economic disadvantage to those folks who may not be complying. We want to make sure that it doesn't become a business decision to not comply. Then we want to inspire public confidence. Again, these policies, permits, goals are all put in place for the long term to protect our water quality or our water supply. And really, we want to inspire public confidence in those programs to make sure that the public believes they are meaningful, that we're working towards our water quality goals. And we're doing that by administering a program with significant compliance to get there. And as always, we want to deter harmful conduct. We're, as enforcement staff, driven by the same passion for water quality as program staff. We really want to make sure that our limited resources are taking meaningful and effective actions to improve our water quality. And moving on to the next slide, the state board has some enforcement priorities that have been identified in coordination with Cal EPA. These are really broad, general statements of enforcement priorities that can be applied to any program, and they can be tailored to your region's priorities. And they're just kind of general statements based, compliance rate. It's a goal that we see a significant increase in the compliance rate of our core enforcement programs, with a focus on our most vulnerable communities. And some of the tools we use to provide that focus is through Cal EnviroScreen or other relevant databases. So this is just an ask to, when you do determine where you're going to focus your enforcement resources, that you have an eye towards what are those communities that historically have not gotten the same level of resources from us as an agency, and where should we be focusing those to improve the compliance rates in those communities. Then we've identified collaboration as a priority, and this is increased enforcement activities conducted in collaboration with federal, state, local agencies, tribes, district attorneys, and private attorneys to maximize effectiveness of enforcement resources. And really what I see this as is a call to be as efficient and effective as possible, to utilize and leverage other folks' authorities and resources to make sure that we're putting our limited resources where there's a vacuum, where they're needed, where somebody else isn't already addressing the conduct. We don't want to duplicate. We want to coordinate, make sure our needs and our requirements are met if they're bringing a case. And similarly, if we're bringing a case, we want to make sure that none of the directives that we're issuing conflict with any of our other regulatory partners or local agencies and what their goals are. Performance. Identify enforcement goals and track enforcement performance measures that drive meaningful enforcement and that focus program on programs with low compliance rates. This is something that Region 5 does an excellent job of: strategic planning, identifying annual goals, making sure that staff meet those goals. And really, this is just a call to make sure that those goals are focused in an area where we do have low compliance in order to bring that compliance level up, and in those communities that I mentioned previously that need our attention. And then communication. Cal EPA put out a communications memo on what kind of communications we should be having in enforcement. Really what this is they really want to promote our enforcement actions. Every action that we take can sometimes be resource and labor intensive. We want to raise awareness of that through media or public platforms, social media, other ways, and be creative. Look at trades magazines. However, just to let the community, the regulated community, know what we're doing, make them aware of our actions so that we get the most deterrent value out of those actions when we do bring someone before you in a formal enforcement action because of some egregious behavior. Otherwise, we want to make sure the community is aware of that so that they understand and it has the maximum deterrent effect possible.
Yeah, I like that idea, Yvonne, because it's being proactive.
Mm-hmm.
It's being proactive, and it's helping people to understand as they're going about doing their business that these are the things, if you step across that line, like giving them a heads up that they can actually try to themselves to do the right thing, and it helps educate the community of where they need to go if they see these violations occurring, that they also know they have some protection. So that's good information there.
And that was really all I had as far as state board priorities and what I intended to cover. Open to any questions you may have.
I have one more quick question. This was in regards to the cannabis program, and you know, I came on board when we were just beginning the regional board. I think Clinton, all of them had a lot of that work, and then it went back to you guys. But what is the status of that program now? Have things improved? I know we were dealing with a lot of the runoff and people putting things in the waterways and so forth. So what's the status? Where are we in dealing with the cannabis program?
Sure. I'm actually just preparing to give a cannabis program update to the state board next week. So I'm up to speed on all this. The cannabis program is still the same size as it has been, that it was after the 2019 reduction. So we are working with limited staff. I think we have approximately 80 staff statewide focused on cannabis as an issue. We still have a lot of unique challenges, but we are much more well coordinated, and we are much more internally coordinated. We have developed a framework working with the Executive Oversight Committee, a communications framework for making policy decisions. And we're working really well with our agency partners. As a program, we're working closely with DCC and CDFW. We're still out in the field doing as many illegal cultivation inspections as we can. We've identified 2 priorities for the program, and they're enforcement against illegal cultivation and getting people into the regulated program enrollments. And that's where we're really focusing our limited resources. I am happy to report, even though we've had a staff reduction in 2019, 2020, we have brought our inspection numbers back up to the pre-reduction levels. I would love to see the program expand in the future. That's not up to me. Hopefully it will. Hopefully we can get back to those numbers, and we can take the framework that we've built and the governing structure that we've built, the efficiencies that we've gained, and then expand it as a program. Because we are still faced with all those challenges that you mentioned. We are still faced with a lot of those adverse impacts. The latest as a program, the latest development that I meant to mention and forgot, so thank you for this question, was that the governor's office has called for the forming of a unified cannabis enforcement task force. And this task force has already been structured. It involves over 20 state agencies with the intent of bringing the full force and effect of all of our state authorities down on the illegal cultivation market. We will play an important role in those efforts as the agency focused on water quality and water supply impacts. We are a smaller program than a lot of our state partners who have law enforcement in-house and have been doing it from this type of enforcement from a law enforcement perspective for a long time. But the hope is we'll get to a point where that triaging of cases is refined and we will get called in when necessary. When there really is a water quality impact at issue, we can continue to join our LE partners and our other state agency and local agency partners in conducting those enforcement inspections and addressing those impacts. That's really the special niche that we as an agency bring to that program, is our cleanup and abatement authority, our injunctive relief. We go in there, and this is something Region 5 staff is really good at. They stick to a site and they make sure it gets cleaned up, and they'll take it to the end of the line. And sometimes that is multiple years, but as long as we have a responsible party we can hold accountable, that's what we do. And make sure that the future threats to water quality are abated before that person is off the hook or moves on to the next site. It is difficult to do because of the illegal component of cultivation and kind of the transient nature of some of these folks. But we, to the extent we can, bring all of our tools to bear on those issues. And then hopefully now with this new unified task force, when it crosses over into more of a criminal issue, we can hand it off to somebody who has those authorities.
And my last question is, how are we doing with getting people signed up? Have those numbers grown?
They're still growing a little each year. It's not as rapid as when the program was first initially opened up, but we're right around 7,000 cultivators. And I know that doesn't sound like a lot to me, because I know that the numbers of potential illegal cultivation are significantly higher. We're still in a situation where more of the cultivators in California are outside the regulated market than inside. But again, that's really why we're still focused our enforcement almost solely on illegal cultivators and compliance assistance for everyone who's shown a willingness to try to come into the market, the regulated market.
Thank you so much, Yvonne.
Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation. I have a couple questions. The first one, it's about cannabis as well. So chemical do get used to grow these plants, and a lot of times they might be discarded where they don't belong, and that definitely contaminate and pollute the groundwater. And I'm just curious, the communication that goes out to these legal growers, is it in the form of different languages as well to intent the growers?
Yeah, cannabis is one program where we work really hard to try to get a lot of translation of our different informational items into different languages, because there is a significant population that are not primarily English speakers. So we are sensitive to that, and we try to include translation when we send stuff out. It's been a bit of a challenge. It slows everything down. It takes a long time to do some of those translations, but we do work to try to get those out in the legal and the illegal actions, focused actions that we bring. The regulated cultivators generally aren't using those banned chemicals. They would not be able to license and test their product and get them into the legal market if they were. So it's not so much of a concern. Those chemicals that we're concerned about contaminating our groundwater, our surface waters, should not be an issue in the regulated market. If they are using them in the regulated market, they are in violation of a number of things, not only our permits, and like I said, they would have trouble getting their product tested and into the market. So really, those efforts are really focused a little more on the illegal market. We try to educate the communities generally about those risks and those concerns. And they're not just a concern to the water quality, they're actually a health and safety concern. Those workers, those folks who are on those sites, if they're exposed to those chemicals, some of them are deadly. And so that's where this unified task force also will be helpful, because we're bringing in OSHA and we're bringing in worker rights organizations, and we're looking at human trafficking. And there's just so much involved in these sites that really isn't within our jurisdiction. I'm really hopeful that having those other state agencies there, they can really help address some of those DTSC, federal regulators when it comes to these banned chemicals, although their authorities are fairly limited to transportation and sales, but still they're interested in them. So really just trying to improve those communication, that coordination and those collaboration with those other agencies. It is a problem. It is something we're concerned about. We're trying to get new sampling technology so we can start sampling surface waters for those chemicals. We did have one effort in Southern California where we did some groundwater testing and we were unable to find those chemicals anywhere in the groundwater basin that had those concerns. So we try to support those efforts where we have the ability.
Yeah, those are great points. To follow up that question, I'm just curious if we have any data that shows the number of cases in the past, and if we are reducing those cases, or is those cases going up as far as violations?
We definitely are going up as far as the number of enforcement cases we're bringing. As far as general compliance, what folks are seeing out in the field, there's no lack of targets. There's no lack of potential enforcement. I mean, we do go on some sites where there aren't water issues, and we try to pre-vet sites as much as possible using aerial imagery and other technologies to make sure that our limited staff resources are focused where there is a threat to water quality or a potential water rights violation. So I cannot say that there's been any decrease in the sheer number of potential violations out there.
Yeah, and I'll add, just to kind of address a couple of the questions. You'll note in the racial equity resolution for our cannabis program, I think we certainly deal with the frustration that many of the counties in the Central Valley still are outright prohibiting cannabis cultivation, which is their choice to do so. But there's a lot of water quality harms occurring due to the illegal cannabis cultivation in those counties. So our cannabis unit is proposing to kind of translate some of the modules that we use for training cannabis growers to essentially at least get some harm reduction out there, frankly, so that folks who are growing in counties where it is illegal to grow, where we cannot issue permits, at least know some best practices to mitigate some of the harm. That's not to say they won't get a visit from the enforcement teams. They won't get a visit from multidisciplinary enforcement units working with local law enforcement. It is still a high priority law enforcement issue for many of those counties. So it does get quite complex. But like Yvonne said, I think that the main focus of our enforcement actions are to try and herd those growers that are eligible for being in the program, but have refused to be in the program into the program, herding them in. So it's a complex matter, but absolutely the language barrier is quite important to address within the program. And unfortunately, I mean, we've seen the articles in the LA Times, I think all of us have, about the continued explosion of the cannabis cultivation industry in California, primarily illegal cannabis cultivation. And, the ugly kind of effects that it has is when you have a illegal market that vastly outpaces the legal market, it creates a downward price pressure on the growers, and you have growers that are trying to do the right thing with this particular commodity that are essentially losing all their money because there's so much illegal cultivation for people who aren't paying the permit fees, who aren't doing the right thing to protect water quality, their worker health and safety, that you just the growers that are trying to comply just don't have the resources to do that. So it's a bit of a mess. It's a bit of a mess. I think our bottom line is we're doing the best we can, partnering with the Office of Enforcement to take enforcement against high priority water quality violations, and trying to do our best to essentially partner with the growers that are trying to do the right thing, get their permits lined up, and comply with all the complex laws that are implemented by the half a dozen different regulatory agencies that regulate cannabis in California. It's one of the toughest kind of water quality issues that we come across here.
Yeah, thank you, Patrick. I think that's continued issues and a struggle that we have to face as far as legal and illegal cannabis cultivations. Just one last question. Do we have the number of cases as far as the ones that goes to the legal growers versus illegal growers?
You mean the number of enforcements we bring for legal?
Or you might be talking about the number of cultivation sites in California.
No,
illegal
no.
versus legal.
Well, the ones that the cases that we have cases as far as compliance goes. I'm just curious. We have that number of cases, legal versus illegal cannabis cultivation.
I would say less than 1% of our formal enforcement is against legal cultivators. Our enforcement program is almost, I won't say exclusively, because if we see an egregious licensed cultivator doing something egregious, we're of course going to bring enforcement. But generally speaking, we are offering compliance assistance and education to anyone who is trying to be in the program. Now, this is hard because there, as Patrick alluded to, still a significant number of counties that make cultivation illegal regardless. They do not authorize commercial cannabis cultivation. So there is no path to legality for those folks. And so they are, of course, subject to enforcement. And we are, like I said, focusing our enforcement resources almost exclusively on the illegal market. So again, very few of our formal enforcement cases against any licensed cultivators.
Okay, and the reason why I'm asking for those number of cases, I just wanted to know so that whatever we were doing, the data, is being transparent to see if we are doing the right thing in terms of communications, in terms of enforcement in that nature, to see if where we're going with these cases. So that's why I'm asking for data. So thank you for your questions. I appreciate it. I'm sorry. Thank you for your answer and comments. I appreciate it.
Of course, thank you.
Thank you, Yvonne. I just had a couple of comments. I think, overall, the enforcement process is so important. Your biggest fans are probably, well, sometimes your biggest fans might be the regulated community that does comply, because there's nothing worse than seeing a scufflaw getting by and, reaping the profits of non-compliance. It's sort of like if you're sitting at a traffic light, a red light, and you see somebody blow through it, you hope there's a cop to enforce the traffic laws. So, overall, it's just a critical part of keeping the public assured that compliance is being monitored and enforced. And then on the cannabis front, I think Patrick summed it up. I've seen a lot of articles. I've seen or heard podcasts about the cannabis market in California. Mm-hmm. There's so many politics around the counties that do and don't allow permitted grows, and then the economics of it. I saw a case that was described. I think the grower was in Mendocino, trying to comply, paying for the permits, paying the taxes upon taxes, and he was basically priced out of the market because of the illegal grows that are providing the product much cheaper. So it's a real challenging area, obviously. I am kind of curious, maybe one question on that front. So most of your enforcement actions are on the illegal grows.
Yes.
How many of those are in counties that permit growing, or do you have data on that?
I don't have data on that immediately off my head. I do know that when we prioritize watersheds, we are looking at like which watersheds are being most impacted by cultivation, and primarily a lot of times it is dominantly illegal cultivation in those watersheds. I think it's almost regional, because Region 1 has a lot of permissive counties, and so the majority of, if not all of their illegal cultivation cases are going to be in those permissive counties. Region 5 has a lot of banned counties, and so Their inspections are spread across both banned and permissive counties, depending on the threat to water quality. So I could, I haven't done that analysis specifically, but it's something we could look into doing, because we try to keep track of banned versus permissive and where everyone is. We do, again, when we are prioritizing, we're looking at potential impact and the concentration of cultivation, the sensitivity of the habitat. Whether it's a banned or permissive is secondary. It's not part of that.
Okay, thank you. I think you go through a good triage process, and I'm sure it's challenging, and it's not going to probably get any better in the near future. So you'll be a busy woman.
It's only one part of my job.
You can't get away from it, Yvonne. I do really want to thank you for being up here, and I think I was going to make the point that cannabis is it's a critical issue, and it's a critical enforcement issue, but of course the portfolio extends to so many other issues. From NPDES permitted facilities to fraud and abuse to drinking water issues to which their Office of Enforcement is gradually reaching into issues involving water rights and compliance there. So it's a huge portfolio, but I can't get away from cannabis wherever you go. But I really, really appreciate you coming forward to talk to the board today.
I appreciate you having me. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Yvonne. Okay, this is a quick meeting today, it appears. We don't have a closed session.
Carrie still has her
Oh, I'm
presentation to
sorry,
make.
Carrie's coming up. Sorry, get into the
No
Central
worries.
Valley.
Carrie almost got off the hook early.
Well, thank you very much, Yvonne. I appreciate the state board perspective, but we're going to go a little closer to home. So give a little Region 5 update. Okay, next slide. So this presentation is going to be geared towards some enforcement education, mostly for some of the new board members. I'll also discuss a few case studies, and then I'll wrap up with enforcement data for last year and how we did meeting targets, and then the proposed targets for this year. We'll begin with resources and organization across the 3 Central Valley Regional Board offices.
Carrie, could I interrupt you for a second? I noticed we're starting to lose a few people for a bio break.
Yeah.
So can I suggest we take a 5-minute break here and then come back?
Absolutely.
All right, so we'll be back at let's say 5 till. Thank you.
I know. I just got so much like shit for talking so much. Question. Here's questions. Don't worry about that's what you're saying. I can't wait to read it. They are good. Help yourself.
It's necessary. I mean, these I am, every time you get the exercise, that's a good thing to do.
Yeah.
When microphones are all live, I can't stop. You don't want to yell at word. No.
Okay, it looks like we've got most of the players back in the room. Carrie, I'm sorry for cutting you off before you even hardly got started. Look forward to your presentation.
That's okay. I actually needed the break myself, so. All right, where was I? Well, here's where we're going. So let's just go ahead and go to the next slide. If Jean's back. Oh, there we go. Okay. Well, I'm sure you're aware by now, the Central Valley Regional Board is the largest region in the state. So we have 3 offices up here in Redding and 1 in Sacramento and 1 in Fresno. So we do a lot of driving. Next slide. In order to discuss the Central Valley Region's enforcement program in its entirety, I'm going to explain how compliance and enforcement staff are distributed throughout the 3 offices. The Sacramento office is the only office that has a dedicated compliance and enforcement section, of which I am the supervisor. The main programs I oversee enforcement and some permitting activities for include the stormwater program, cannabis, NPDES, which are discharges to surface water, forest activities, landfills, and discharges to land. I have a total of 24 staff reporting to me, including 4 senior managers and 20 staff that consist of engineering geologists, engineers, environmental scientists, and scientific aides. Next slide. As I am the enforcement program manager for the 3 offices, I do not supervise all enforcement staff across the region, as you saw in the previous slide. The resources for compliance and enforcement are spread throughout the region and over multiple programs. In the 3 Central Valley offices, we have about 138 staff performing compliance and enforcement staffs, which it equates to about 57 personnel years, or PYs. Of the 57 PYs, 25% operate out of the Fresno office, 21% out of the Redding office, and 54% are in the Sacramento office. This presentation today is intended to be an overview of the enforcement efforts across the offices for the entire compliance and enforcement program. Next slide. This table shows a list of the programs that have dedicated compliance and enforcement staff highlighted in the pink/purplish square on the left. The programs with dedicated compliance and enforcement staff include the NPDES, or National Pollutant Discharge Elimination Program, which regulates discharges to surface water, the Land Disposal or Title 27 program, which primarily regulates landfills, and the Waste Discharge Requirements, or non-Chapter 15, which regulates waste disposal to land. The column on the right lists the programs where staff perform compliance and enforcement duties in addition to other duties such as permitting. Next slide. As I mentioned earlier, I do coordinate the enforcement across the programs and offices. I keep tabs on and track all enforcement, but I don't assist on all enforcement actions. As you saw in the previous slides, there are a number of programs that implement permitting and enforcement within their program without compliance and enforcement section assistance. They do, however, reach out when they're looking for advice with complicated enforcement cases and to keep me involved for region-wide consistency purposes. As part of this effort, I do gather data across all programs from multiple databases bi-monthly to prepare the compliance and enforcement section of the executive officer's report. Next slide. As part of the enforcement process, violations are usually identified by dischargers self-reporting in their monitoring reports required by their permits. Other common ways we identified enforcement cases is through complaints and staff inspections. I track recommended enforcement cases and prioritize them with the prosecution team and the Office of Enforcement. Prioritization occurs in line with the Central Valley Water Board's strategic plan and the compliance and enforcement program priorities, which are approved by this board on an annual basis. Significant violations with impacts to water quality and overwhelming evidence are also taken into consideration as we prioritize. As I mentioned, these activities happen in the other offices and programs I do not oversee. Therefore, I have recently developed a new tracking tool for all program managers to maintain and keep updated for reporting purposes. Next slide. As part of the new tracking spreadsheet, I've included a column to indicate the CalEnviroScreen percentile score. I think Yvonne mentioned CalEnviroScreen to you. I'll talk a little briefly here about what it is and how we're going to use it in the future. CalEnviroScreen is developed and maintained by the California Office of Hazardous Health Assessment. It helps board staff understand the role that race and ethnicity plays in the context of pollution burdens and vulnerabilities in communities we're considering taking enforcement action for water quality violations. That's what we try to examine with CalEnviroScreen, the intersection between the pollution burden impacting a community along with the characteristics of people living in those communities. Multiple pollution sources are disproportionately concentrated in low-income communities with high minority populations. Communities with certain socioeconomic factors have increased sensitivity to pollution. A combination of multiple pollutants and increased sensitivity in these communities can result in higher cumulative pollution impacts. The higher cumulative pollution impact scores will be used in the future to assist in our prioritization process. As you can see on the right, the community outlined is Allensworth, which is the highest percentile. The color indicates that it's in the range of 90% to 100%. The regional board will begin prioritizing enforcement in communities with percentiles that exceed 75%, which is a typical standard used by the state. Next slide. There are multiple tools that are used in our progressive enforcement process. We don't jump straight to an administrative liability or penalties when pursuing enforcement. These tools include informal and formal enforcement. I think Yvonne touched a little bit on these tools, but I'll just go through them quickly. The most common informal enforcement actions include staff enforcement letters and notices of violation. Formal enforcement actions include 13260 orders requesting a report of waste discharge from a discharger that is either not currently under a regional board permit or a discharger that has a permit that needs updating due to operational or facility changes. 13267 orders are where we request technical reports if information is necessary that is not stated in their current permit. 13308 orders, or often referred to as time schedule orders, are necessary when we are looking for a formal schedule to bring a discharger back into compliance with their current permit. Cleanup and abatement orders may be issued to any dischargers who have discharged waste in violation of their permit. Cease and desist orders are often used to dischargers issued to dischargers with chronic noncompliance issues. These problems are rarely amenable to a short-term solution and often include extensive capital improvements or operational changes. And lastly, we've got administrative liability complaints that impose liabilities by the Regional Water Board for certain violations of permits and laws. Enforcement cases brought before the board, if settlement cannot be reached, would include time schedule orders, CAOs, CDOs, and ACLs. We do also coordinate with the district attorney's office and can refer cases to the attorney general when warranted. Next slide. Administrative civil liabilities can be settled a number of ways. The discharger can pay the penalty and the matter will be resolved. In addition, alternatives to the assessment of civil liabilities, such as compliance projects, supplemental environmental projects, and enhanced compliance actions are available. But those projects require standards for the approval of such alternatives to ensure they provide the expected benefits to water quality. Water boards do not have discretion in assessing some penalties, such as mandatory minimum penalties, which I'll discuss in a few moments, and must initiate enforcement against all dischargers that accrue those violations. However, the California Water Code section provides an alternative to assessing mandatory penalties against a publicly owned treatment works that serves a small community. Under this alternative, the Regional Water Board may allow the discharger to spend an amount equivalent to the penalty towards a compliance project that is designated to correct those violations. In addition to a reduction of payment of the penalty, a settlement can result in the permanent suspension of a portion of the liability when the discharger voluntarily agrees to fund a supplemental environmental project. A supplemental environmental project we refer to as a SEP is an environmentally beneficial project that a discharger voluntarily agrees to undertake in settlement of the action and to offset a portion of the penalty. And lastly, ECA's enhanced compliance actions are projects that enable a discharger to make capital or operational improvements beyond those required by law and are separate from projects designed to merely bring a discharger back into compliance. Next slide. Mandatory minimum penalties are the most common type of ACLs issued by the Compliance and Enforcement section. I'm going to refer to them as MMPs. MMPs are issued to NPDES dischargers, which discharge to surface water. MMPs are $3,000 per effluent limit violation. There are two groups of violations, serious and non-serious. Serious violations include exceedances in excess of 40% for Group 1 pollutants. And Group 1 pollutants include biochemical oxygen demand, nutrients, detergents, oils, minerals, and some metals, or exceed 20% for Group 2 pollutants, which include inorganics, organics, and all other metals. There's a list in Appendix A that outlines which constituents fall where. A serious violation is also given when a self-monitoring report is submitted more than 30 days late. All other exceedances of effluent limits are considered, quote, non-serious violations, also considered chronic violations. Next slide. Now I'm going to take you through 3 cases where settlement occurred and ACL liabilities were imposed. The City of Tracy's wastewater treatment plant had 13 total coliform violations between January 2020 and March 2021. The picture on the right is of the city's chlorine contact basins, where chlorination effectively kills waterborne bacteria and viruses and continues to keep the water safe as it travels to a surface water. These are 13 non-serious chronic violations, and they result in a $39,000 penalty. $12,000 was paid to the cleanup and abatement account, and $27,000 was suspended in lieu of completion of a supplemental environmental project. The project is titled Temporary Emergency Housing for Tracy's Unsheltered Water Use Facilities. The project is on track to be completed by May 2023. And in the next slide, I'll talk a little bit more about the project. Next slide. The City of Tracy's project is to provide enhanced shelter for the city's unsheltered population. The city's unsheltered community tends to reside at city parks, in stormwater detention basins, along the East Side Channel and the city's primary stormwater drainage channel. There are restrooms in some park locations, but those residing in the detention basins and the channels have no access to clean water or appropriate sanitary facilities. The project is going to be located on the eastern end of the city's wastewater treatment plant. The emergency housing facility will encourage the unsheltered community to relocate from the nearby basins and channels that are being negatively impacted by the trash, the human waste, and other contaminants. Installation of sanitary facilities will help eliminate surface water contamination in the facility or in the vicinity of the wastewater plant, which includes discharges to the San Joaquin River, which is also a major drinking water resource. The $27,000 that they're contributing as part of this SEP is for phase 1. Phase 1, as I understand, is actually a $1.7 million project. So it's a very small addition, but it's an addition. Next slide. This is another common ACL type imposed to dischargers that have sanitary sewer system overflows, which I'll refer to as SSOs. The State Board Sanitary Sewer System General Order and Monitoring and Reporting Program regulate sanitary sewer systems. There are 3 types of spills. Category 1 are spills to surface waters. Category 2 are spills greater than 1,000 gallons that do not reach surface waters. And Category 3 basically are all other types of spills. I will note that these categories may be changing as the general order is set to be renewed by State Board in December. Next slide. SSOs are discovered by board staff in a number of ways. One such way is by receiving a complaint from a municipality, other agencies, or the public. In addition, operators must report SSOs to the Office of Emergency Services within 24 hours of the spill. Also, the general order requires monthly reporting in our database called CWIX. Legally responsible officials certify monthly reports by either indicating no spill reports or they report spills that occurred in the previous month. Next slide. I'll discuss the details of the settlement reached in 2021 with the Sacramento Area Sewer District. So with this ACL, we only assessed category 1s. If you recall, those are only the spills that they discharged to surface water. Although there were category 2 and 3 spills, we decided to stick to impacts to surface waters. The violations are broken up in a number of different ways for a number of different reasons. I'll try to briefly explain. Violation 1 was a 489,000 gallon spill to a tributary of the Mokelumne River. A lot of times when collection systems have very large spills, which we consider over 50,000 gallons, it triggers board staff to go and look at the record for that collection system and see how they're doing, how they're operating over time, if they've had any other large spills or a number of spills that should be basically brought before the board and reconciled due to the volume discharged to surface waters. So that spill in particularly triggered this ACL. Violations 2 and 3, approximately 144,000 gallons of sewer overflows to the American River watershed. So as you'll see, we broke out 2 and 3 and 4 based on spills to the American River watershed versus spills not to the American River watershed, as they have different sensitivities in their habitats. And so the factors that Yvonne was discussing resulted in different numbers, different thought process for staff. Violation 2 and 3, the reason those spills were split into 2 and 3 is because the enforcement policy was updated halfway through the period that we were looking at the spills. So what that did was it resulted in different penalty calculation factors under the 2010 policy versus the 2017 policy. Violation 4 was a total of 435,000 gallons of overflows outside of the American River watershed. In this case, even though the time period spanned over 2 policies, when we did the calculation, the factors did not change based on the policy changing, so we got to get away with 1 violation. Obviously, when you break up more violations, it's more work for staff, so we try not to. Anyhow, so we did negotiate a $630,000 payment for these spills. This penalty is reasonable considering the size of Sac Area Sewer District. So the size of their system, along with the number of spills per mile, is actually not that great. And our CWIX database, if you go into it, you can look at any collection system, and there are factors that database will give you to kind of tell you per mile of sewer system how they're doing. So they're not all directly comparable. In addition, this discharger spends a lot of resources to maintain their system. They always are very responsive, cooperative, in line with the enforcement factors that Yvonne was pointing out. And so, we work with them to resolve the spills as they know they have to, but, they do a pretty good job overall. They just get a little bit of the brunt of it just due to the size of their system. And they're very good about taking corrective actions, updating their sewer system management plans, that sort of thing. So, next slide.
Carrie, could I ask you a question on that one? I'm kind of curious what causes these spills. Are they PO2W upsets, or are they rain-related events, or just maintenance?
They're usually due to oil and grease or blockages, sometimes lift stations that get backed up and overflow, but mostly just, honestly, oil and grease is the biggest. They have a really good maintenance program. They really do. They have it outlined in their compliance program, their SWIP. They do a lot of regular maintenance, so they're one of the better responsible agencies. And quite honestly, a lot of times they come to us asking to resolve some of these liabilities because they want to show that they're doing everything they can. They're kind of a model, honestly, for collection systems.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So regional board staff, this is the last case study I'm going to talk about. This is more along the construction stormwater side. Regional board enforcement staff have a slightly different process for settling most of our construction stormwater cases, which we call compressed ACLs. I'm going to list a few differences between the regular ACL versus a compressed ACL, but the bottom line is it's less resource intensive. And the reason it can go that direction is because the evidence is very compelling. So there's not a whole lot of arguing that goes on. So in a compressed ACL, one of the things we try to identify are relatively short duration violations, but severe enough violations to warrant a penalty. Full ACLs, typically we look at longer term violations and dischargers that are recalcitrant on a normal basis. Compressed ACLs are designed to settle. Again, we're trying to reduce the resources and but also make a statement to the other contractors that you have to all follow the rules along kind of in line with the consistency that we're looking for in applying the enforcement rules and policies. Full ACLs can be settled, but they can also end up here before the board, which, as I mentioned, can be a lot of work for staff. Compressed ACLs only include violations that are indisputable, mostly because of photographs, which I'll show you in upcoming slides. Full ACLs can include all violations that sometimes have less evidence, maybe a little more speculation, a little more modeling, theoretical calculations involved. Both of these ACLs use the enforcement policy steps. And again, compressed ACLs, usually they're just less effort, less time consuming, can be settled pretty quickly. You'll see in a minute. And then sometimes you go to a full ACL with a contractor and it can take years. So next slide. So when construction stormwater sites are inspected, they're not inspected with the intention of going to enforcement. Enforcement depends a lot on the discharger's initial efforts to comply and on the discharger's response to our inspections. Stormwater staff conduct pre-winter inspections of active construction sites to evaluate whether they see potential issues. Typically, verbal discussions occur first, and then a follow-up inspection will be conducted upon the first major rainfall event. If there continue to be issues with containment of stormwater on the site, a verbal warning is given, followed by a subsequent inspection to see if corrective actions were put in place. It is at that time regional board staff issue a notice of violation if they see that the controls were either not installed or are not working. If the issues continue after the NOV, that's when we consider doing an ACL, and most of these we do consider compressed ACLs based on the indisputable evidence. These slides kind of show a picture tells 1,000 words. So not only has board staff proceeded with progressive enforcement in this process, but it allows the discharger time to come into compliance before we jump right to assessing a penalty. Next slide. It's crucial for these compressed ACLs to organize all evidence, including photos that are date stamped, water board inspection reports, dischargers' responses to those inspections, qualified stormwater pollution protection plan practitioners, or qualified stormwater pollution protection plan developers' inspection reports, if they have those, either one or both of those on the site, and any other agency's inspection reports. From that evidence, we then decide what violations to include, download rainfall data to confirm a large storm event occurred at the site, determine a start and end date for the violations, which is usually something we discuss with the discharger and negotiate ahead of time so that we're on the same page, and then start calculating the penalty using the enforcement policy. Next slide. So the Sacramento office just this week issued 7 compressed ACLs for settlement. The penalties range from $38,400 to $185,700. What's really unfortunate to me about these violations is that not only are they avoidable, but they're avoidable at very reasonable costs. As you can see, the economic benefit ranges from $500 to $25,000. And so one of the reasons we wanted to get these ACLs out and issued before the next storm season is so other contractors can see we're trying to make a fair playing field, that we are watching and, we are going to notice. And if you are a contractor that saves $25,000, you might get a $185,000 penalty. So, the most common violations for these sites include discharging stormwater without implementing best available technology or best control technology that's economically feasible for them and the site. The other is not implementing erosion control best management practices on active areas during rain events. Next slide. All right. The really exciting part, the numbers. The last topic I was going to talk about are how targets are established for compliance and enforcement. For each of the programs listed, an inspection target or a goal is established each fiscal year. Inspections are really the only, quote, goal that we have that's reportable, that we report to State Board and try to achieve every year, although we have plenty of other goals in our work plan and things that we're trying to do, but you can't always anticipate how much enforcement you're going to need to take each year. Although State Board might be working on that. For each of the programs listed, an inspection target is set. So for last fiscal year, you can see that we did really well overall. I think we didn't meet. So for MPDS, we didn't meet the major facilities inspected, but we exceeded minor. That's because we had a couple minor facilities that we were concerned about. So we decided not to see one major and go see a couple other minors that we were concerned had issues. And then landfills, we did fall a little bit short, only 94%, but this last fiscal year, we did have quite a few complaints come in regarding land disposal, and so we were on a number of other inspections. Next slide. Okay, so for this slide, I wanted it to be a little bit different, and I'm going to update it before I make it available to you board members and have it posted. This is the last 5-year total of total major enforcement actions across all of the regions. It doesn't really tell you a whole lot other than how we do compared to the other regions, which also doesn't really tell you a whole lot. What I was looking for is Region 5, how we've performed over the last 5 years. And I wasn't able to quite pull that data last night, but I tried. So that'll be updated. But as you can see, I mean, major enforcement, we do pretty well. Again, I don't think it's really a matter of comparing to the other region, more comparing to how we do as a region as we are a larger region and resources and all kinds of other things. So I will update that. Okay, next slide. So for 2022-23, these are our inspection targets. They probably don't mean a whole lot to you, other than what I can tell you is that they're basically consistent and in line with what we have done the last 3 or 4 years. So there's not a whole lot of variability amongst the programs that I saw changing. We are hitting a little bit of a higher goal for the MPDS major facilities, and that's because we have a commitment to inspect those facilities on a more regular basis than other facilities, including the miners. So, next slide. More inspection targets. So again, as I told you, I don't oversee all programs, but here's site cleanup program and underground storage tank. They report these targets to me, so this is their expectation for what they're going to inspect this next year. Again, much in line with what I've seen over the last few years. Next slide. Oh, last slide. So that's a little bit of information about the Compliance and Enforcement Program for Region 5. I appreciate your attention, and of course, I'd be happy to answer any questions you have. But cannabis was covered, so.
I just have one comment, Carrie. I under the compliance and enforcement data, staff is to be commended for, in most cases, exceeding the total tracking goals that you had laid out. I mean, considering the times that we're in and the tremendous pressure of how you guys have had to adjust your work schedule, you're still meeting your targets and exceeding in most cases. So kudos to the staff and all the work that you guys are doing.
Yes, thank you. I mean, I feel lucky in that sense because staff have been wanting to get out of their homes for some time now. So, you know, they do have the privilege of going out, and staff are they coordinate a lot with dischargers to make sure over the last few years, you know, everybody's comfortable and what level of, you know, protection needs to be taken. So masks have been used, driving in separate vehicles, social distancing, all of that has been part of it, but seems like we're getting back to normal these days. So
Thank you, Carrie. I was going to say the same thing. It's very commendable. You guys are able to keep up your performance with all the challenges out there. There's probably a lot of strings to pull to just communicate with your staff when they're working from their homes or they're on the road. So great job. Look forward to getting a copy of that presentation. And also Yvonne's, I assume we'll be able to see that one later.
yes.
Great, thank you.
There are excellent numbers there. I will say that one thing that the executive management team works a lot with Carrie on are those metrics. Because I think the challenge is, you know, the metrics are only good for so long, right? And we put out an idea of inspection targets or certain inspection numbers. And we want to make sure as we continue to look at those metrics that they measure what they're supposed to be measuring. You do see, you know, some when the objective in other regions was, well, we got to have more enforcement actions, or we have to have more inspections. You see the inspection numbers just skyrocket, but the question then becomes: is that really accomplishing, you know, what we are set out to accomplish? And I think in the enforcement context, it's probably one of the hardest programs to devise metrics for. You know, when you get a permit across the line, that's an easy bean to count, box to check off. You know, you've got an enforceable tool that complies with all the policies and procedures for a permit. But for enforcement, it's much more nuanced. You know, does an inspection really result in the type of compliance? How much time are you spending in the facility? How deep are you going? Are you catching all the violations? And I think there are some questions when the numbers skyrocket, as they have in other regions. Well, is that resulting in measurable water quality improvements? I think Carrie's done a tremendous job, I think, partially due to her experience working in the NPDES permitting realm for a while, which is one of the most complex permitting programs in the country, of trying to make sure that those metrics do mean something. But that's something that we will continue to consider and replace. And maybe it's not the number of inspections, maybe it's the number of violations per inspection, maybe it's the amount of time that staff spend in a facility, as opposed to doing a drive-by inspection. All those are something that we have to continually juggle and think about and refine so that the metrics, change up. Because once you start working for the metric instead of for the water quality goal, then we have problems. I think one of the things that Carrie does, and I think the enforcement actions bear witness to that, is really try and keep those fresh, and try and ask the probing questions of, so you hit 100 inspections. What does that mean for water quality? Did those inspections accomplish the task? And if not, maybe we do 50 inspections, but we spend twice as much time, or change it up a little bit. And I think it's worth it to keep the regulated community on their toes too. That they don't know exactly what they're in for when one of Carrie's teams shows up. That they're really going to be looking at their facility and maybe looking at something new this go around.
Good point, Patrick. I think it's also nice you have the flexibility to redirect resources to minor facilities that you mentioned if you have concerns there, and if you don't hit the major facility target for that reason, that's totally valid. So
Yeah, I think exactly what Patrick just said. I mean, we try to go where the need is, where we're going to have the biggest effect. And that's why a lot of the construction stormwater and industrial stormwater inspections are so important. The more they're visually seen out on these sites, the other contractors and other industries, they take notice. Sometimes that results in better compliance than efforts going through ACLs. So
I have a question, but before I answer that question, I also want to thank you for the data. I work in the daytime as an engineer, so data is very critical for bringing solutions. So thank you. I'm just curious on the spells of to the rivers. How do they typically identify it?
Well, as I mentioned, the reality is most dischargers self-report, luckily. So we're gonna be one of their first calls. They either call the regional board or Office of Environment, or Office of, why am I blanking? Oh, yes. Yes, emergency service. They sometimes call them first, sometimes call us, but most dischargers are very responsive and reactive because they know that that's the first step in complying and the first step in working with us and other agencies like Fish and Wildlife and whoever else is going to have questions about what has happened. But there are times that the public often will call us and complain. They can complain through the Cal EPA complaint database. We get complaints that way. It's a couple different ways, but they're all responded to the same. A lot of times the complaints that come in through the database or from direct public members are discharges that actually the municipalities are not responsible for. They're usually laterals that are spilling that the homeowner is responsible for, or apartment complex, that sort of thing. But that's generally how we get that information, and then we respond immediately. And again, most of the municipalities and collection system operators are very responsive. This is their job. It's the smaller communities that have the most difficulties because they have very few staff that respond to a number of operational needs for small cities, not just sewer. So they're doing it all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Nick, I don't know if you have any questions.
None for me, thanks.
Okay, thank you, Nick. All right, thanks again, Carrie. And Yvonne, thank you.
Thank you. And yes, thank you. Thank you.
And I want to thank Carrie for her presentation. I do want to stress something that I think both Carrie and Yvonne touched upon, is that, you know, the integrity of our enforcement program is to a certain extent the reason why you see so few cases appear before the board these days. The regulated public, they know when Carrie's given them a call and we're negotiating a resolution of a significant enforcement case, that they've already run through the metrics, that they're giving them a fair shake, and that they're not being unreasonable. You know, tough but fair is kind of one of the mantras of the enforcement program. So whereas, you know, I know especially you, Denise, in years past, you'd see a lot of dischargers take their chance in front of the regional board and say, hey, well, I don't know, you know, I don't think, you know, the board's enforcement team has got it quite right. They think it's a $200,000 penalty. I think it's a $5,000 penalty. I'm going to, you know, bring it to the board. I think that the fact that Carrie and Yvonne and their teams have established such a strong reputation of fairness, it really means that when they put a settlement document in front of a discharger, they know that they're being given a fair shake. So I often will talk with Mark, or previously talk with Carl about the settlement if it involves anything controversial. In most cases, also consult with Adam, and it used to be Alex, and now it's a different staff that are neutral to kind of review the administrative record on these cases when big cases settle, even when little cases settle for that matter, and make sure that everything's fair and it all makes sense and the pieces all fit together, and that the findings and the order actually tell the story of what happened out there, and we're not left with lingering questions. And I really want to commend the team for putting a lot of good settlements forward. The settlements do save a heck of a lot of staff time and resources. But, you know, the case studies show that's indicative of the type of settlements that we're signing off on. Some of them very big, you know, in the millions, some of them much smaller, you know, $12,000, $10,000 or $9,000 for mandatory minimums. But all of them, I think I can absolutely stand behind at the end of the day on behalf of the board. And if I had any question about those would be the ones that we'd be bringing in front of you to adjudicate. But,
Yeah, thanks for that comment. I mean, since I've been on the board, I've noticed that the number of ACLs has reduced, and that is evident by the work that Carrie and Yvonne have been doing. And settlements, I mean, we want to look at the best way to try to resolve the issues. The ACL and bringing it before us is the last step. So where you've had that opportunity to reach a settlement and get the discharges to see where they can be in compliance and extend more to make sure that the work that they're doing is not going to have an impact. I mean, it's great. So I appreciate those comments, and I certainly appreciate the work that Carrie and Yvonne that you're doing, because enforcement is critical. I mean, if we're not making sure that the water quality is there and that discharges are just snubbing their noses at the work and complying, then we have an issue. But the work that you're doing are helping to keep the discharges in line and, you know, resolving it before it has to be an ACL before us. So commendable work to the both of you. Thank you so much.
Okay, I think now it's time to mention that I don't believe we have a closed session today, Jessica. No closed session. So with that, I think we're ready to adjourn, unless there's any last comments from anybody.
ready to adjourn. The next board meeting is WQCC, which is the meeting of all the regional boards downtown Sacramento on the 27th and 28th of October. So just a couple weeks coming up. And beyond that, we have a meeting on the 8th and 9th of December. So certainly hope to see you there.
Time to have another Christmas party for a change, huh? It's been a few years.
Absolutely.
Okay, thanks everybody. customers.